Happy to have Jen Stirrup here with us today. So Jen is a data strategist and technologist, the founder and CEO of a data science and business intelligence consulting company called Relish. She works with startup companies or large household name companies, government offices, and some universities. Her work in business intelligence focuses on data visualization, big data, and AI. And more recently, business intelligence in the cloud. In addition, Jen's also an author on Tableau and R, and a public speaker not only about business intelligence and big data, but also about diversity in the technical community. Jen's also one of 160 Microsoft regional directors in the world. And the recognitions that she has received also includes the Microsoft Data Platform Most Valuable Professional. She was also named by Solutions Review as one of the top 10 women influencers in the world in data and analytics for business intelligence. So the title of her talk today is it possible to democratize AI for businesses? So let's welcome Jen.
All right, hello everyone. Can you all hear me? Yeah, good, okay. I hope you can all hear me. I'm sorry, I can't do much about the Scottish accent, apart from hope it doesn't make you go to sleep, because sometimes it's very relaxing. But hopefully the topic is exciting enough that you want to stay with me for the whole thing. So I've been delivering artificial intelligence solutions for businesses before it was trendy and cool. I've waited this long to be trendy, so I'm really enjoying it now. Data science and artificial intelligence are just the place that we want to be. So you're in the right spot. Okay, so who am I? That's a picture of me. You're more than welcome to take photographs of any of the slides. I'm on Twitter, probably on Twitter too much, really. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I blog, and I've been 20 years in the industry. So I wanted really to talk about some of the challenges that we see about artificial intelligence. I believe quite strongly that the hardest thing to change about technology is people. Anything that involves people is a really complex issue. The tech we can fix, but sometimes what we do with technology impacts people so much. So it doesn't really feel like a democracy anymore. But what it does do is it feels as if people are uneasy about the changes that they see in the industry. Because right now is the one we're really seeing a revolution in terms of how people view data, how they view artificial intelligence, and how they view computing. And some people are being left behind. So this is just one particular quote here. AI-based decision-making provides management professionals with a sound basis for sound leadership. Normally when I deal with businesses, I deal with people who have been living without data-based decisions for a large part of their career. And suddenly they're being asked to be data-driven. And suddenly they're being asked to make all of these decisions based on data. But the problem there is that not everyone has a high degree of data literacy. So that causes a disconnect with people. It may seem strange to you that people are not as passionate about data as we are, but those people do exist. And that's who we see in businesses. So it doesn't always feel like there is a real democracy, because a democracy sounds as if people have got a choice. Actually, do they really have choices? Are they well informed? These are the sort of issues that I hope to share with you and get you to think about. Because for me personally, when I look at artificial intelligence and data science, what I do see is that people can get left behind. And when you go into say you go from academia into a career in business, you'll find that there is a disconnect and people need to go on a journey where they need to understand where does data fit in and where do I listen to my gut. So we're asking a lot of people in businesses right now. So And what we see, a quick quote here from Nicholas Carr, skimming is becoming the dominant mode of thought. As humans, we're not designed to read and understand billions of data points at a time. We're just not. We need data to be made human-sized for us, okay? The thing is when you look at Twitter or the internet, we skim, we snapshot, we see things, and then we move on to the next thing. That's why TikTok and Instagram are so popular, right? If you haven't seen TikTok, don't install it, because you'll spend forever watching 6-second videos of people, falling off buildings. But that's what seems the way we are with the internet. We have got this mode where we are skimming a lot. So how is artificial intelligence going to help with this issue? Because that's in the entertainment sphere, but what about businesses? Will it actually make things worse? Because when we look at the business, we see that there is almost a continuum. I see businesses or business leaders who want to be data-driven at the expense of people perhaps using their gut. And this is the sort of thing that I hear people saying. Genius depends on the data within its reach. What happens then is people end up with more and more data thrown at them. But that can become very overwhelming, because they don't always understand the data very well, and they don't always understand the summaries or the patterns involved in that data. That's why data visualization is really so important. But given that we're already being overloaded with information and data, is that really a data democracy? Just because there's lots of data, does that really mean that people have a choice? It also can depend on the type of data which organizations are being asked to think about. So say, for example, Google or Microsoft or Facebook or someone like that wants to buy a data set. People can be more uneasy about that than perhaps allowing a university or a hospital access to the same data, because of the sense that there will be profit made there somewhere. So people are starting to understand just how valuable their data actually is. And they're starting to understand the power of that data, how it can impact their lives and their businesses. So we talked about big data a few years ago. Everything was big data, hashtag. And data was the new oil. So that was going to, all you needed to do was take your data, refine it the same way you did oil, process it, spit something clean out to the other end, and you would end up with all of these magic insights. So data is the new oil, was the phrase. But what we're seeing now is AI is the new electricity. So tech companies are trying to encourage people to use artificial intelligence, making artificial intelligence accessible for every application, for every person, and for every process. So data is really accelerating business and social change. And this is when people start to get left behind. So what is a data democracy? Let's have a think about what that means. So the definition I've got here is taken from Forbes. There are plenty of other ones. I've just used this one. So data democratization means that everyone has got access to the data, and there are no gatekeepers that create a gateway to the data. So this was specified in Forbes in 2017. And people liken it to the printing press, which emerged centuries ago, because that allowed people to have access to newspapers and to books. And that allowed people to have access to lots more data than they had previously. If you're a lover of true crime stories, you may know that the lurid graphic stories of Jack the Ripper in London was one of the first major media stories, and it's fair to say an amount of embellishment took place. So let's look at this definition of data democracy more deeply from a business perspective. What this really suggests is that businesses want to give everyone access to the data, and it sounds like a great idea and a great phrase. However, being able to search for data better doesn't actually mean it's easier for you to make decisions about the data. it's not always very clear how businesses came to certain decisions about you based on that data. And there's a tension in a democracy between autonomy and control. So when we look at definitions of data democracy, they're sort of masking the fact that there is that tension between autonomy and control. Autonomy allows you to maximize your liberty, your individual liberty, and you can make decisions based on what you want. But what we see in business is a lot of control around data, but not necessarily a lot of autonomy. Just because you can search for data doesn't mean that actually you're in control about the data that is being used to make decisions about other people. It doesn't mean it's quite easy to hide the data if you want to disappear. We have this in Europe at the moment, the right to be forgotten, and there's cases going through at the moment. So given that businesses are very, very excited about this idea of data democratization, what does it actually mean? It really means sharing data across teams to maximize the benefits of the data for the business. It means the data can be viewed through diverse lenses with diverse expertise, and it means that the business as a whole can benefit from different perspectives on the data. So I'll give you an example which happened in the UK press recently. One of the airline companies built an algorithm which identified which people were more likely to pay more in order to sit together. So if you can imagine you are traveling in your holiday with your friends, your family, or your children, naturally you want to sit together. So the algorithm was trying to work out who was more likely to pay if they were split up. And obviously the decision being they'll put people in different places so that on the plane so that they will pay extra to sit together. Now it seems to me, why did that happen? Because there's a whole process when you take an algorithm to production in a business. Someone has to have the idea, someone designs it, someone codes it, someone tests it, then it gets deployed to production, and you've got a mechanism for supporting it. Now, the interesting thing for me in that example is not at any point in that process did someone put up their hands to say, hang on a minute, are we the bad guys? Isn't that kind of an immoral thing to do? I don't know about you, but if I travel with my 14-year-old son, I want him to sit next to me so I can keep an eye on him. He's 14, he's probably not quite so keen to sit next to me. Teenage is a funny age, and I get that. But it seems when we talk about data democratization, having access to more data doesn't mean that people will make the right or the best decisions with that data, and they won't always use it for the best purposes either. So there was an outcry in the UK because people were concerned, and the algorithm was dropped, and they didn't use it again. But I think when we start to look at data in a business, it can give you quite a lot of power to do things like that. But what we do need is more people to stand up and say, hey, is that really a valuable thing to do? Is it the right thing to do? And what we do see are companies like Microsoft and Google, they're starting to talk more about the values that they can actually see and how they can adhere to those. So Microsoft, for example, talk about empowering every person on the planet, and that's their mission. I think they've had a bit of a bumpy ride, trying to get to a place after having been through so much litigation. But now they've grown up and understand that actually we need to think about not just is something technically possible, but is it the right thing to do? So Google's Pinchar wrote an article last week in the Financial Times which suggested quite strongly actually that Google should be subject to some form of regulation, and the AI that it produces should not just be left to market forces on its own. So it seems that we are at a point in the industry where we have to think very carefully about where do we go from here. Is it something that we need to think about what our values are? I think the thing that saddens me in a way is that we're talking about ethics and technology like it's a new thing that's just appeared. But what that tells me is that we lost that somewhere. and we're just trying to rediscover it again. And when did that happen and why? It's thinking about these things that make it so interesting. So in businesses, it's considered imperative to distribute data across all working teams because that will give us a competitive advantage. The more people with diverse expertise who have the ability to access the data are more likely to see insights. And there are people who believe that data democratization is a game changer and that it really allows people from diverse backgrounds, different lenses on the data. I chose a picture of cats, partly the fact I like cats, it's 3 generations from the same family. So they are all, when you start to look at things across generations, that can make a difference as well to how we perceive our data. Okay, so how do businesses hope to use the data? So you may have heard of this. It's rephrased in many different ways. It's called Metcalfe's Law. Robert Metcalfe, inventor of the Ethernet, those cables, that was him. So Metcalfe talked about the network and the power of the network in order to reach people. So it's been specified in different ways, but the idea is that the community value of a network grows as the square of the number of its users increase. So if you sell something to me, you're inadvertently selling to my friends and my family as well. That's the idea. So it's about the power of data is it's allowing people to do that. We saw that with the scandal of Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, where people were taking data, but it wasn't just your data when you signed up to do your personality test or whatever it was in Facebook. It was also your friends' data as well. I actually met someone from Cambridge Analytica recently. I was really surprised. I said, what do you put in LinkedIn? Surely people are asking you about it. He said, no, I just said I was a student. It was just easier. So I thought, oh well, okay, fair enough. So the idea is that data allows you to be very targeted when you're accessing your customers. And customers really are interested in being able to do that. So what I want to say really is that data accessibility is not the same as data democracy. So as we increasingly digitize our digital lives, we create valuable data as we walk through buildings even. When I swipe into work every day and swipe back out again, then I'm creating a data point. I saw a statistic recently that we create at least 250 data points on average a day. So that's just how much data there is about us as individuals. Anytime you make a bank transaction or send an email, we're all about collecting more and more data. So artificial intelligence systems are like the electricity that use this data in order to make accurate predictions and decisions. But we need to be users of this data, but we're also producers. And that means we should also be controllers as well. So organizations are increasingly private about the data that they hold about people due to security concerns and GDPR. However, this is in contrast to the democratization of AI and data. It feels like a bit of an imbalance when you sign up for a service like Facebook. Although you're giving them your data, you're still expecting to have control over it. But actually, the control is really with them, and now you're the product rather than the consumer or the producer. So we talk about artificial intelligence democratization, but we can't have that until we have data democratization first. And that's the ability for people to be able to be controllers of the data properly. And why is data becoming so popular? This is just a quick chart, so you might have seen different iterations of this. How long did it take to reach 50 million users? Airlines, 64 years since their inception to reach 50 million users. ATMs, 18 years. Computers, 14 years to get a real sense that things are speeding up. Pokemon Go, to reach 50 million users, took 19 days. Okay? So when you think of the sheer rate of data explosion involved in all of that, suddenly it brings home to us just how important data is turning out to be. So this is raising all sorts of interesting questions when business think about artificial intelligence. We have all heard of the Turing test, I assume. Where are you, is the AI, is the robot, computer able to convince you that it's a real human there? So that raises interesting questions, because if technology regularly passes the Turing test, that means that chatbots will get so much better. But when you're dealing with a chatbot, is it right that the business should tell you that that is a chatbot, or do they not have to tell you? So that's when it becomes quite interesting from the ethical standpoint. I don't know if you saw this week actually, but last week Amazon have produced something called brand voice. I don't know if you've heard of that, but what they're doing is sonic branding, it's called. It sounds amazing, it sounds like a Pokemon to me. But what that is, it's about choosing a voice that represents your brand if you're a business. And you get to work with Amazon engineers in order to produce that brand that is your voice. I don't imagine there's many takers for my Scottish accent, but for a lot of people, it's about trying to determine what are your business values that could be represented in a voice. So when you think about that, does that mean you want a more feminine, very helpful, very soft voice? Or are they wanting something that represents something quite different? I suspect what will happen is those voices will be taken up first, and then you'll be left with accents like mine, I suppose. People might not want to don't understand quite so well. But it's easy to predict that Amazon brand voice leads to a mainstreaming of voice technology in marketing. And it can really, when you take it to the next step, once you've got your Amazon brand voice, what's the next step with that? It really means that you would be interacting with an AI that has a voice which has been designed by a business. So we already see some sonic branding. You see it in jingles, ads, or sounds that products make, and very short snippets of music or noise. So if you're old enough to remember AOL, the "You've Got Mail" voice that used to appear. If you're not, ask someone about my age and they'll be able to tell you. But brand voice really exists to help Amazon customers to craft a sonic brand through the creation of custom simulated human voice. And it will interact conversationally via customer service. So that for me is really interesting, because does that mean that you should actually notify the customer that they are interacting with someone who isn't real, it's a chatbot or it's an AI voice? The thing that really interests me about it is about the decision-making aspect that's gone into it. There's a strange paradox when we look at artificial intelligence in business. We talk about AI as empowering every person and making things easier. We talk about a partnership between human and AI. But what augments us in some ways, we also have to take something away in another way. So by producing these Amazon brand voices, it may be augmenting our interactions with customer service. But what it's also doing is taking that job away from someone who is a real human. So it looks like it's improving us, but in some ways it's not improving us. And that's how we need to think about it in businesses. What are the impacts? It's not just about this partnership between AI and human. It's about trying to understand what's the impact, not just on the sonic brands, but on the person who does get left behind by the technology. What do we do about that? So what businesses want to do with data democracy is make artificial intelligence applicable, accessible by every application. The end goal is that the application, like an AI technology piece, can access as much data as it needs in order to produce the output that's required from it. And it does that with no barriers to access or understanding. And we see more of this. I see this in Microsoft technology, where data scientists can build a model which produces results through a web service, and that web service gets retrieved by an app that's been built by, say, a .NET developer. So the data scientist produces the model, the .NET developer produces the front end, and they both meet. And it's actually really easy. It's about 2 lines of code, so you can go and look that up. It's really surprising how easy it is now to do that. It's all about making AI accessible by business processes as well. I've put this quote, this is personally one of my favourites, because one thing I see a lot is organisations that are really, their data is on fire, they are living, and data is often in Excel, it's on people's laptops, and it's not shared, and they don't collaborate. So when customers say to me, we want to use artificial intelligence, one of the first things I'm looking for is their data all in Excel? And is it just lying on their laptops? I'm more interested in improving the process first before I can start to take it to the next level using AI. I should add there's nothing wrong with people using Excel, nothing wrong with it at all. It's just the way it's used sometimes. It's used outside business processes. And I think that's where the alerts start to appear. So when we look at artificial intelligence adoption by businesses, there's still a number of challenges. And one of those challenges is data literacy. Now, I'm assuming because everyone's here, you've got a high degree of data literacy. But we see often that data literacy is unfortunately lacking in a lot of people. They don't have the critical skills to really think about the data in a critical way. That's why we have flat earther groups on Facebook, right? It's we need to, some people need to understand the data better and then have a think about it. But the fact that in this day and age we're still having flat earth conversations suggests to me that we have a bit of a way to go before we can start asking them to interact and produce AI programs, because goodness knows what will happen there. If they find along the way that they're not flat earthers, then that's fine. So what we see is in the industry, and this is something that may start to alarm us a little bit, this is about search technologies. And who actually owns the ability to search for data? What is that data democracy and what does it look like? It's not really looking like a data democracy, because what we see here is that the vast majority of search is owned by Google. This is only a subset of the data. It doesn't contain all of the data for Baidu as well. So when we put those two together, does that really look very democratic to you, that one company owns 89-ish% of the search? Because what they're responsible for then is the data democracy part, where they're allowing you to search for what you are looking for. They're owning that search piece. That means they can present to you what they like. And I don't know if you see this sometimes, but you might be talking about something in conversation, and next time you go to Google Maps, it comes up with a restaurant that you just mentioned. It's not that it's listening to you, it's more that it's got really good at predicting what you're going to do next. So I think there is some discomfort around the fact that just a few companies are owning such a big part of search. So that impacts businesses and what they can actually show to you. Because if they can control search and data, then they have a real impact in technology and society as well, because the two things are connected. So what we've got here is open source technology. How does that fit in with businesses and the efforts for data democracy as well? I presume you know Tim O'Reilly, founder of O'Reilly Media. Empowerment of individuals is a key part of what makes open source work. And this is all about people working in small groups in order to make open source technology work. Open source, as you know, started in academia. Many of you will be using R or will know what it is or will have seen it. So it's a key driver in research progress in artificial intelligence and database spheres. So many businesses are now supporting open source technology, including Microsoft, Google, and there's other businesses you might not expect to be supportive of open source technology, such as LinkedIn, Deutsche Bank, and Uber. They're all involved in open source software. However, open source has also been adopted by businesses in order to recruit, retain and support AI talent, the people who actually are the best AI engineers, to improve their services. And the result is that they make more money from it by supporting open source and getting the best people involved as well. So there can be a clear intention to make money from open source despite the generosity that we might see involved in it. So it's one of my favourite quotes from William Gibson, science fiction writer. I'm a bit of a science fiction fan. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. As artificial intelligence and data continually starts to permeate the world of work, we can see this with the growth of robots, the things appearing such as Amazon's brand voice. When we see these start to appear, this means that people can start to be left behind. Usually we find that women are more disproportionately affected than men because they are in these lower paid service jobs. So it becomes a society problem, not just a technical problem. How can we cope with that as businesses? So when businesses start to think about where they are in a data democracy, this is something that I personally use. I'm trying to help businesses to understand where they are. And the way I look at it is that there is a conflict between autonomy and control when people access their data. So in the bottom, we can see we have control, low levels of control to higher levels of control. And then on the y-axis, we have got lower levels of freedom to higher levels of freedom. So what businesses want to aim for really is a data democracy where there's a high level of control with the IT departments and data governance over the data, but the business users can also get to the data that they want to make the decisions that they would like to make. But then with some businesses, they have a data anarchy, and that means that business users are living in Excel or Google Sheets. They have a high degree of control over what they do, but none of the data is backed up. It's not stored. They don't have access to it offline. So there's a low degree of IT control involved there. We also have a data aristocracy, which is the green one at the bottom left. I hope you can read that all right. But in a data aristocracy, we see that in a small business where the business leader has access to all the data and doing everything themselves, and nothing is joined up. We can also have a data dictatorship, and that's where the business, their data access is very much controlled by IT. So it's starting to more appear like a dictatorship rather than even pretending to be a democracy. So people will only have regulated access to certain data sources and not others. So when we start to look at it in a business framework, it becomes interesting. How do we start to learn from this and apply these lessons to academia as well? In business, I think it's harder to get access to the data that you might like to get a hold of. That's because I think there's a suspicion around profit or people benefiting in some way, improving their bottom line. But what we see, I think, is if it feels like the data is coming to a university or a hospital or perhaps to the government, there's a bigger sense of benevolence around that somewhere. So it's how can we help each other in order to try and understand each other better and learn from each other. And it's about, I think this is a good place to start, is thinking about what degrees of autonomy and control do business have and does academia have? Universities, what kind of access do they have? And how can people work together in a framework that will allow businesses to support progress, get good ideas, and get the mentorship and the leadership that they want from universities like here to be trusted advisors to help them on that journey and to help them become more forward-looking instead of being stuck in Excel all the time or Google Sheets. Okay, so is this approach feasible? Is it possible to have a real data democracy where people have got good control over their data, that are allowed to make decisions with it as way that they would like, either for themselves or for their organisation? Well, many organisations are still living life in Excel because they don't have good dependencies in place around the data. Now, in case you may have seen this before, but in September 1973, this is a logical map for the internet. Just that, right? Can you imagine trying to write a logical map for the internet now? So this is ARPA. It's the ARPA network before it turned into what we now know as the internet in 1973, and that's a logical map. So if we had such a small process of data, maybe that's something that businesses could work with. But the reality is we are just absolutely swamped by data. And because we're swamped by data, it looks like we live in a data democracy, but I'm not sure that we do, because there's just so much of it, we don't know where to start. And sometimes the data we get is not the right data. I'll give you an example. I'm obviously British. We have been through the process of Brexit. I have to say I am not happy about Brexit at all. It makes me miserable. I much prefer to be part of the European Union, where we have perspectives about being global and helping one another and having higher values. So listening to the BBC and the British news channels, one day I switched over to Bloomberg, obviously US channel, and Bloomberg reported that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, had asked UK journalists to leave a press briefing because they had asked him questions about Brexit, which he could not answer. They asked him for detailed plans. He didn't have any. They still don't have any. And this was only a few weeks ago. But none of the British news channels reported that. I only got it because I happened to tune into Bloomberg and I happened to tune in to hear it there. So sometimes the fact that we are drowning in data doesn't mean we're drowning in the right data. And it doesn't mean we're presented with everything that's the right thing. I'm still waiting to hear in the British press about Boris Johnson asking journalists to leave. And personally, I think this is why investigative journalism is so important, more important now than it ever needs to be. I pay for a New York Times subscription, and I'll sometimes switch and I'll choose another American newspaper, and I will pay for The Guardian in the UK as well, because I'm just trying to support people who are trying to give us the data so we can make up our own minds. And having a global, choosing different international newspapers can help us to do that. Otherwise, I never know that Boris Johnson was asking journalists to leave, which I think is really wrong, but there we go. So lots of organisations obviously don't have data like that, where it's in a nice, neat, logical map. What they have is a lot of what we call in business shadow IT. And what shadow IT means is the data that flies under the radar of the IT department, and it lives a life of its own. Businesses probably run very often in shadow IT. We talk about big data, but actually sometimes it's the little data living in laptops that's running the organisation. That can be the most important piece. So that's what people do when they don't feel they're living in a proper data democracy. They form like a little rebel alliance and go off with their own data. If you have not read the Phoenix Project or the Unicorn Project, I suggest that you do. Welcome to my life every day with data. The cost of the business is that organisations can't make any benefit from the data or insights because they can't access it. And even if they can access it, they can't always visualise it they'd like to. So how do we get around that? One key item is data governance, and thinking about the issues of dirty data and how do we assess and understand data quality. That's not a popular message, because we all want to do the fancy artificial intelligence. We don't always want to think about the data on its journey to getting there. And I think in Europe, we've had GDPR. People are talking about similar rules here. I don't know if that will happen or not. But sometimes people confuse data governance with GDPR. Or we tick the GDPR box, so therefore we have data governance. But that doesn't mean that they understand, protect, and insulate the data sets. It doesn't mean they understand them at all. So because you can't understand the data you've got, it becomes one area where you could start to think about having a data democracy. I speak to organisations a lot about their data. Very few of them have got a data dictionary and a data glossary. They just don't collect them. It's just bewildering that I'm asking the question. And then when we start to look at big data sources, the problem of data understanding just gets even worse. I'm surprised we actually make any money in any businesses at all sometimes when I look at the data. So how do we then try and understand, how can academia and business learn from each other? How can we go from research to deployment? What I do find is that I think I read recently, between 60 to 80% of data science projects never go to production and never get deployed. I think there's many reasons for that. I think what happens is people start to find a number. They say, yes, we've built a model, the AUC, the area under curve, is 0.89, so we're good to go. But what happens is they can't communicate or translate that number into a context that people can understand. So what happens then is the product never goes live. So I think what's really important is not just data literacy and having data science skills, but being able to become like an analytics or a data science translator who can take that data, take those results, and explain them back to the business in a way that they can understand. It's all about that collaborative teamwork that we can actually explain to business leaders, this is what's happening, without them feeling stupid, you know. They don't always need to know about the wonderful codes that lies underneath it. They will ask questions about, what can I do to make this solution safe, make it work well, and have a positive benefit on the company, on its mission, its values, and its profit. So they want to know these kind of things. So there's a big issue at the moment, which I've been reading about repeatability and benefaction in computer systems research. It's a really interesting area. We see it in academia, we see it in business. If I give you my code and my data, and could you reproduce what I've done? And what some researchers are finding, they went through some conference papers and researchers were not willing to share the data or the code. So that's another instance where I think a data democracy in academia would be a good thing. The way I see that working is if you had Kubernetes, Docker containers with your codes and your data on it, you could give that to someone else. They could go and download it, check it out at GitHub, make changes, check it back in again. And that would be a really collaborative circle for people to start to work in. I don't see that happening now, but I think as Kubernetes container technology becomes more prevalent in industry, and then it will start to be a case of academia and business starting to work together so people can get their trust in their data back. Okay? Because I think there is a willingness for businesses to work together to start to share ideas better. What I do see in the UK is a lot of competitors have come together in the insurance industry. They're trying to share data so they can capture fraud better. We call it crash for cash, where people crash the car and then try to claim insurance benefit of some way. So we are seeing that people are wanting to share ideas and share data. Now companies like Microsoft and Google, LinkedIn, they will sometimes share their ideas on research. And you can go and look up their website and have a look at those ideas. What I would say is that if you look up, say, Microsoft Research, they do a program called AI for Good. It has, they do fund academic projects. So if you are interested, you should go and have a look at their website and look at their funding opportunities, because I think they're sort of open to ideas. So please go and Google them and see, you know, see if anything sort of grabs you. So how do we then move forward? Because we've established that we don't really live in a data democracy. We're not always presented with the right data at the right time. It's not given to the right people. The reality is the skills for the future for artificial intelligence are not always only just the technical skills. Having emotional intelligence becomes more and more important all the time. And we can see, because people need to think about what they're doing with the technology, not like our people with the airline who were just throwing out algorithms to make more money by splitting up families. We can't have that. It's more about trying to understand people better. But to do that, we need the right policies and institutions in place. But what might they actually look like? Businesses and organisations are starting to look at this already. So what we have here is OECD, Overseas Economic Development, and what they say is that there are opportunities that we gain from digitalisation and globalisation, which also brings risks as well. There's a benefit and there's also a cost. Organisations and countries can try to work together to put these policies and institutions in place that might help mitigate risks to people, such as job losses or requirements for extensive retraining as people try to keep up while maximising the benefits. There's a lot of anxiety around the future of work and what that looks like. It looks, according to the research done by OECD, it looks like the sort of doomsday scenarios will not be likely to materialise, but there are real risks because there's a massive technological change coming where people start to use artificial intelligence more. It can mean that work becomes more precarious and workers have got less bargaining power. And that means that will produce or could produce skills gaps, particularly when populations are ageing rapidly. So we need to start to make policy decisions now and make them with each other, with different countries, and with the right policies and institutions in place, then hopefully we can maximise the opportunities that globalisation and digitalisation will have for us, while trying to mitigate the risks for the people who are most likely to be impacted by it. And what do these, this is what the Overseas Economic Development Assessment looks like. You can go and download it. It was released quite recently. There's a lot of academic papers being released about this because people are asking the questions. It looks like there are concerns about the future of work and AI destroying jobs. Employment rates, however, have been upwardly trending, so we don't see what we might, that jobs are disappearing. Actually, it looks like more people are entering the workforce. But it does seem likely that jobs are likely to change. Okay? So we're no longer thinking about using printing presses now. We are using automated processes to do that. But there is a concern about job churn and what that will look like. How do we retrain people on a massive scale if they are suddenly no longer in employment? How can we detect that's going to happen? How can we stop it? And what can we do instead so that people can live their lives with a sense of purpose and make sure that they can earn a living? So we need a lot more social discussion, I think, if we're really aiming towards a data democracy where people feel they can make decisions about AI and make decisions about data and still participate in the way that they'd like to. Because there are real ethical questions about this. So this is the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, which he wrote last week in the Financial Times. I felt this was a very strong statement from the CEO of Google. Companies such as Google cannot build promising new technology and let market forces decide how it will be used. So there is a call for some regulation, potentially a regulatory market, which is a potential opportunity where we have got regulatory bodies, different organisations, but we can't expect people like Google and Microsoft really to regulate themselves. Maybe what they should do is give these companies goals and say, okay, so by such and such a length of time, we will have a certain percentage of cars that are self-driving. Can you meet that objective? So the regulatory bodies are not acting like a police force, but they're more acting like goal setting, and that will help determine the direction that companies like Microsoft and Google are willing to go. So what is Microsoft doing? There's plenty of other examples as well. IBM have also produced a toolkit. Microsoft have set out 6 standards for artificial intelligence solutions, and they will eventually imbue technology in their Microsoft Azure computing cloud platform that will help people to build chatbots, for example, that have a warning in them, so that the people using the chatbot are aware that they are interacting with the chatbot and not a real person. So they're trying to imbue what they call the AI ethics toolkit into their cloud computing platform. I expect we will start to see more and more of that as time goes on. They've also developed some guidelines, very specifically with chatbots, about guidelines for developers of conversational AI. So these are the sort of things we can start to see businesses producing more and more as we go along. So Microsoft, along with other companies, are producing chief ethics officers. Microsoft have got a chief ethics officer. His first name's Tim, I've forgotten his surname, terrible. And they have got an Office of Responsible AI. And what they're trying to do is set up policies so that they can actually help ask good questions of themselves as they move forward into this world of technological and social change and how it affects businesses as well. We've also got the Global AI Index. There's a lot more of these appearing, but this is where we're starting to assess the readiness of countries to be able to cope with changes that artificial intelligence might actually bring. But this is fine, but it's dealing with the opportunities of AI rather than looking at the risks of artificial intelligence. So if you're interested in think tanks which are looking more at the risks of AI as we move forward in this world of work, the University of Oxford have set up a Future of Humanity Institute, an interdisciplinary body which is looking not just to AI technology, but the questions around that. It's bringing together the tools of maths, philosophy and social sciences to look at the big picture questions about humanity and its prospects. Because ultimately we need to think about human-centred AI, and that's where I think the direction for data democracy will end up. Well, the technology is not going away. After all, we have a piece of artificial intelligence with us in our pockets every day. You will all have a piece of AI with you, and we're not going to hand it back anytime soon. So if I say, okay, Google, this is going to kick off, Google Maps, Bing, whatever you're using. But what we need to do is make sure that the artificial intelligence we're building in businesses is human-centred, and that's making us rediscover or rethink our values when we are looking at businesses. So data governance can help us to move forward, and here's just a few ideas of the direction we may go in. We may, instead of AI being used to interact with people, it may start making decisions for us. Guided analytics, perhaps it will present us with data in an Excel spreadsheet and then give us ideas of what to do next with those numbers. It will help productivity by smoothing out processes, makes things faster. We see that already with handwriting analysis, for example. It's making things faster so we're not relying on humans to do it, and that's when we start to get into what is the benefit, what is the cost. And then we've got augmented reality as well. We'll all be like the Minority Report with the helmets and surfing through our data. So we also need a level playing field where we need to give people better access to data literacy. That has to be done right from the start in school. We need to give them access to better tools that they can use more easily. And I don't mean deep fakes, so we're all making deep fake technology. That's not a good use of AI. It's fake, the clue's in the name. I can't make it any clearer. But we need a warning probably on it to tell people it is fake, and that's missing at the moment. And that's where we start to end up in trouble. So, and leadership needs to measure itself as well and think hard about the values. We have a concept of accountability, which is not the same as responsibility. The leader in the organisation might be accountable for the direction of AI, but it's the team that's responsible for building it and thinking about it. So there's a disconnect between accountability and responsibility, and that's something we need to work out, is who's actually accountable and who's responsible. So AI will go from identifying trends to making better decisions, and we need to think very carefully about the data quality. And our very last slide, I'm going to leave in quotes from Ferris Bueller: life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it. That applies to our data. We don't understand fully what the full impacts that a data democracy might have in an enterprise and in other organizations. But we do need to stop, take a look around, and look around once in a while and look about where the industry is going and where AI is going and how we can be part of that story to make sure that academia and business can work together and that we can think better about the costs and the risks to humanity as we move forward. So with that, I think I am just in time. And I wondered if there's any questions. Thank you.
I read a report that was like a few months ago about how Google trying to enter European Union market, and they were negotiating the regulations because there are some really good content makers and they're attracting traffic to their website, and they're trying to figure out a deal to say if Google is supposed to pay those content makers or those content makers should instead pay Google to make them appear on their top search results. So I'm wondering, what is your thoughts on that?
So for me, it's a really interesting question because it feels that we're all fighting to get onto the page one of Google. And Google, I think, are starting to do things like, I see them promoting some websites instead of others. I moved to Azure for my website, and the website traffic just plummeted. I wasn't getting anything. So I moved back to Google, and all of a sudden it's back again. So I think there's all sorts of things happening with search optimization. But the problem is that Google own that. It's their proprietary, and the balance is not there of power because it might be your content, but Google own how they are pushing that out to people or not pushing it out. So that's where a very subtle form of control is taking place, I think. So for me, I think Google, I think it's almost like you pay for your website to be promoted in some ways anyway, because you buy Google ads and they flash up and you get so much credit from Google. So it's interesting how what they're presenting to you, and I think that takes the control away from the person searching for that data. The third party who wants to see it. So I think there's a lot there. It's a really interesting question. I'd love to have a look at your paper just if you're interested. It sounds really interesting.
So for all those, you brought up a really interesting topic about data democracy. So for people who are in professional, they all use LinkedIn, but now it has gained a lot of traction to people to use that, and then they recently renewed their search functionality, so you're limited by the amount of search you can have, and they're trying to force people to pay for the amount of search they have. If you don't pay for the premium, you just are not allowed to do that anymore. So for those really big corporates, they own all those data assets, but they're trying to, but they build that assets in the first place by collecting all those information from us, and now they're trying to collect more money from their users. And would you think that should be the way for the future of those business to go, or is there any other alternatives?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it's the lack of transparency that's the issue, and that causes a lack of trust. Because LinkedIn used to be free, but now it's about $50 or something for premium. So it's not like a little amount of money. I think $50 a month is quite high. I think it would be better for people who were using LinkedIn really to build a business, for them to pay, but not for individuals like you and I who are just on there to be found really, or to communicate when we're producing content on that platform for LinkedIn. But I understand the premium is, it does seem fairly steep, but I think it's the lack of transparency for me that's the problem. And who's accountable for that? Because if you don't engage with LinkedIn, it's almost like a necessity for a career. The real problem I have with LinkedIn actually is that they don't seem to do enough to prevent harassment online. So if you are female and you're on LinkedIn, sometimes you can end up with some really quite unpleasant messages from fake profiles, and what I'd really like to see from LinkedIn is a real effort to clean that, where people are booted off LinkedIn if they're sending messages which are harassing in some way. That's what I'd like to see. You know. So I've got a big criticism of that. That's okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you all very much for having me here. It's been my absolute privilege. I don't know if there's any other questions. Oh, there's a gentleman at the back. Hello.
Yes, I have a quick question. You mentioned that a number of tech companies are asking for more regulation.
Yes.
Do you think that the regulators are capable of writing the regulation?
I think they're still trying to create regulatory bodies that will look after this. I think I see the European Union have just produced another paper last week. The UK have just produced 12 principles of AI. I think what they need to do is collaborate more, because it feels like people are pointing in different directions. The UK paper was much more black and white, low risk, high risk, no continuum. But the European Union one was much more about a continuum in shades of grey. So now the UK and the EU bodies are arguing because they've come at it from a different angle. But I think they're forgetting that they're both trying to do a good thing. They're both trying to do the same thing. So I remember reading once that if you really wanted to kill computers off, you could ask them to form a committee and become managers, and that would really destroy any effort. You know, that would destroy them. That would do it. And I think sometimes we need to stop battling with bureaucracy a little bit. I like the agile methodology because it's small steps of success. And there's no reason you couldn't have a very high level matrix, which then translates into finer guidelines, which people can apply. Because sometimes these things are so vague, you can't apply them at all because they don't really tell you anything. And I think when people start to get into black and white, low risk and high risk, they will always say something is high risk, because that means that they just stop doing it then and they don't touch it again. Because I think it would be good to be less risk averse, because there seems to be a real disconnect. We see businesses, Google, Microsoft, taking lots of risks and having the financial resources and the legal resources to do that. But these regulatory bodies they don't have the same funding. So instead of Microsoft having an ethics office, it'd be great if they would think about funding a joint ethics committee with Google and the rest of them. I think it's all people. I can solve tech, but people I can't solve. Hello.
Until regulations catch up, is there any duty for the consumer to identify certain businesses or services that don't follow a democratized AI system?
I think the only power the consumer has is actually to withdraw their purchasing power from that organisation. And this is where I think consumers can have a bit of a fight back, because if you imagine AI has got some sort of feedback loop, and then say, as an example, you decide, I'm going to go for a coffee, and you don't go to a big chain, but you go to maybe an LGTB-owned community co-op for your takeaway coffee in the morning. So what you're doing is using, even though it's only a few dollars, you're doing that maybe every day, you are teaching the AI, Google, about you, that actually they need to promote more ethical things to you instead of, big chains. So I think actually what consumers can do is that's their way to fight back, is by making ethical procurement decisions. I attended, in the UK we've got something called Extinction Rebellion. I don't know if it's here as well, but what they're doing is all sorts of things to promote climate change. I don't know why we call it climate change. It's, a bit, Anyway, we'll go with that. But the thing with climate change is that we need to worry about it. We need to take action. So I attended a clothes swap and, try not to buy new clothes for a year, that kind of thing, just to try and make a small stance against what's happening. But if you consider AI as a feedback, what's the target, what's the label you're going for? Then trying to feedback ethically into a system, maybe that starts over time, makes it more ethical. But it's a great question. It's something I'm quite passionate about, is companies as well making better procurement decisions so that the vulnerable are not so much affected. There is, you might know of a company called SAP. They have partnered with a small firm who do an index of how ethical the suppliers are. And I think we need more of that. They will measure them on metrics such as plastic reduction, water reduction, slavery matrices, empowerment of women, because women tend to be disproportionately affected by these changes. I've forgotten the company's name, and I'm sorry, I will try and put it on LinkedIn later. But it's great that companies are starting to think about the ethics of procurement, and I think we just need to keep banging that drum about it to teach the AI, the Google, whoever, that actually that's important to us. And that gives us a better planet.
Thank you.
You could also use a great browser and it blacks out their trackers and apps.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you.